Hi everyone, you're about to watch or listen to my interview with Steve Kilbey from November 6, 2021. If you like these conversations and want to hear more of them, please hit the subscribe button and share this link with anyone you think will be interested. That's a beautiful piece of artwork just over your shoulder there, Steve. Some beautiful colours there.
That one there?
Yeah.
It's a self-portrait my brother rang me up one day and went, "You've got 3 days to enter into the Archibald Prize." And I've had word that I've got a tip, that you should enter because I think you could do really well. And so I knocked that together, and it didn't get anything at all.
It's beautiful. I love that blue, that shade of blue that you've used there.
All right, well, I've got a big set of pastels. I just reach in and go, whoa, that'd be a nice color. I don't know anything about color theory. I don't know anything about painting, but I don't know anything about music either. I just have sort of, I'm just the same way I'm guided by some intuitive feeling with music. I do the same with painting. So I just go, oh, the sky's got to be blue. And I look in my thing of pastels and go, oh, that'll do. And that's the color it is.
Well, that's what a true artist is, isn't it? Someone who
I don't know.
Intuit.
I guess so. I don't know. I think there's a scale. I think true artists run the gaunt of people who completely work intuitively, and then there are people who probably get taught to, like, especially with painting. They go to university and learn how to paint like the old masters. I don't think you can teach yourself to. I'm not sure. I don't think you can teach yourself to paint like the old masters. Just like I don't think you can probably can't teach yourself to compose like Mozart or something. There are some things that seem like they need some kind of, you need to be educated somewhat. And then rock and roll seems like the opposite. It's like, to me, it seems completely intuitive. And all the people who've done the best have been completely intuitive. And that's when I meet some old colleagues who are teaching at these rock universities, I'm very skeptical and normally say something rude, like, people who are, it's like sometimes I used to do these songwriting workshops, and I used to feel like the first thing I should say was, if you're at this workshop, you're already in the wrong place, because great songwriters don't go to fucking workshops.
Makes me think of any time that I've worked with a classically trained musician to do a part on a record, and sometimes I want them to come up with something, to improvise something, and they can't improvise. They can read it and play it beautifully.
Yeah. There are these incredible people who are across both worlds, and I have had classical people who can improvise, and on the other hand, I have met rock and roll musicians who do read, but rarely the twain meets. And you could get the greatest cellist in the world and get him into your gig and go, do something Beatlesy, and he'll go, oh, what do you fucking mean by that? So you got to, if I'm getting a player in like that, if I was to get one in, if I don't have an arranger who's intervening for me and telling them what to do, I would always say, you can jam, you can improvise and do stuff, because that's a lot of them, that's the last thing they can do, which is strange to me, because jamming seems the easiest thing to do, and reading notes off a bit of paper seems the hardest. But that's music, and that's art, and that's the world, and there's so many fucking ways to do things, aren't there? And that's I keep saying to people, vive la différence. Last night, me and my girlfriend watched two documentaries, one about Johnny Thunders and one about Brian Eno, which we haven't quite finished yet. And there's two guys, very famous guys, who had one who goes on having guys who had a huge impact on the sort of rock and roll world. And you couldn't get two more opposite people in some ways than if you tried. But I guess that's the great thing about rock and roll. There's room. There's sort of room. There seems to be room for everybody.
Also makes me think of, I just recently watched a little documentary about Phil Collins during the Phil Collins Big Band in the late 90s. And there's this whole section where he's admitting that he can't read music. So he has to come up with his own weird shorthand way of being able to remember and learn and play these big band arrangements of his own songs. And, you know, he gets enormously frustrated at times because everyone else can just pick it up and read it and play it.
Yeah.
He needs to have weeks to sit down and learn it.
How did he ever remember all that stuff he did in Genesis? I think that's there are some Genesis videos that have come to light recently of them playing on Belgium TV shows, and they do like one of these 12-minute epics. And I can't imagine how a bunch of guys who were 21 or 22 came up with and conceived of all that music. It seems beyond me. Yeah, I got a lot of time for Phil Collins, not what he ended up doing, but you know what he was doing in those Genesis days, and sort of mimicking Peter Gabriel at a up an octave, singing along with Peter Gabriel the whole time, up an octave, giving him that 2 vocal attack, and playing drums.
They were very complementary to each other in those early days as well. The voices almost indistinguishable from each other. He was like it sounded like Gabriel up an octave. Yeah.
It was wonderful, wonderful. People probably listen to their records and don't even realize what's going on. I was talking about that in the studio the other day. You might have an octave vocal going all the time. The church often did, and I'm sure people don't even think, oh, there's an octave vocal going along with this. It just sounds like, wow, what a great voice. But it's actually, you know, there's so many vocal tricks where the people probably don't even think about, you know, double tracking your own voice and stuff.
Well, we are going to get to Genesis today.
Okay.
But before we do that, I want to give you an intro. Speaking of improvising, I'm not yet at the Andrew Denton or Parkinson stage of being able to completely freewheel through an interview. At least I'm one of those people that can get a bit beholden to some of the questions they want to ask. Yeah. We will talk about the Winged Hills, but there'll be a range of other subjects as well. Okay. And, you know, frankly, for me, this isn't so much about, I want to get 1 million subscribers. I saw an opportunity to, you know, have an excuse to line up an interview with you because you've just done this record. And I love it. I wanted to talk about it. And also I heard that you were a big Genesis fan. And I thought, all right, I've got to ask this guy about Genesis as well.
A huge, huge Genesis fan.
Huge. All right. Well, here's my little intro for you, Steve.
Okay. All right. Okay, go, Ben.
Today, I'm interviewing one of the great modern lyricists, a musician and songwriter with such a deep well of creative waters that the 40 years since his first album with the Church has sharpened his teeth and widened the scope of his imagery, as well as giving a bit more gravel to his voice. All of this is evident on this year's sprawling double album, The Hall of Counterfeits. I am, of course, talking about Steve Kilbey, who is talking with me from Coogee in Sydney. Thanks for making the time for a chat, Steve.
Hey, Ben. Any friend of William Arthur's is a friend of mine.
For those watching who might not know who William Arthur is, William Arthur fronted this wonderful Australian band called Glide back in the 90s. And there's a story there that needs to be told. And Steve is going to be participating in a documentary about this in the new year. But we'll get there a little bit later. Steve, I want to start off talking about this beautiful double record you've made. And you've recently said how music can be like a city or a jungle. And I really liked that description. And I thought I'd throw it back at you to open the interview because I can hear both of those in this record.
Okay. It really occurred to me in the last 20 years. I'd often go in studios and music became a visual process instead of an audio process. And I'd go in studios and there's a guy sitting there looking at all these blocks and moving it all around and taking this from there and putting it there and putting this there and putting that there and all the T's and all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. And the music from the 80s on had a tendency to become sort of perfect. And some of the records I participated in LA, and then afterwards, it seemed like the goal was always to make these perfect records and then suddenly I've had this revelation so late in my life. I found a studio that I like working in. I've had some patrons who are ready to finance my adventures, and I found some players who are ready to indulge me. And I've realized I don't want my music to be perfectly planned like an architecture like Canberra, the planned capital where everything is this and that's there and that's on top of that, and then you have access to this. I don't want that. I want my music to be the absolute, on this, with the winged heels at least, I want my music to be the opposite of that. I want it to be a sprawling, writhing, organic thing like a jungle, with things wrapped around other things, and suddenly patches of light, and then ran monkeys in the treetops, and beautiful birds that you never see, and snakes biting your feet, and just everything going on, and no rhyme or reason. Things will stop and start, things will meander, to absolutely try and negate what I hate happened with the 90s. You take, sorry, the 80s, what started happening in the 80s, where producers would come in and they try and make they start with the drummer. Don't do rolls, don't be wild, all the drummers I like were drummers who are like, I watched the doco on Keith Moon, on The Who the other night, and Keith Moon's sitting there and he's just fucking doing whatever comes into his head. And then the 80s came along and were like, no, that will not be like that. It will be boom, boom, we'll have metronomes, and we'll have sort of quantizing. You know what quantizing means?
Yeah.
Making the timing perfect. So on the map, once again, you've got your map, your grid. Everything's on the grid, and the snare will fall there, and the hi-hat will fall there, and the kick will fall here. I don't want that. I'm trying to get rid of that. I'm trying to have a bunch of really good musicians in a room, meandering, wandering, improvising, making mistakes, jamming, and letting the music be as organic as possible, and to completely revolt against that stupid idea. Of course, as they would say, the music that the young folk listen to today is completely that. It is completely quantized and auto-tuned, written by the same bunch of people, put through their machine, so they deliver this sort of perfect stuff, which, I don't know, just completely leaves me cold, which they would probably be happy about and go, well, I'm glad it's leaving this old guy cold. Just like when I was 18, I probably wouldn't want some old geezer enjoying my music. That's part of it.
I think it fits with the corporatization of music that's been happening as well.
The corporatization of music. People other than musicians deciding what musicians should be like, trying to chase chart success, going, oh, that guy was successful with that, we'll try that as well. I've sort of done away with all of that. I don't have any record company. I don't have any producer. I don't have anybody that I answer to. And when I say leave it a mess, it can stay a mess. And no one can go, no, Steve, you can't do that. There's nobody to make happy anymore. It's all over. There's not that many people listening to it either. But for what it is and for what it's worth, it's what I want to do. And I've had this revelation that's how I like my music served up, like a rambling, wonderful mess, not a wonderfully organized series of things that all hit their points. I'm over that, and I'm done with that. So following my heart, what my heart wants to do.
So if this is a reaction against the production of the 80s, it sounds like, and it does sound like on the record, it's a return to the freewheeling, organic nature of the music of the 70s.
Yes, the 60s and the 70s. I'm a classicist, I think, and it's like when it comes to paintings, I like classic paintings. I don't like four squares and a circle. I like a painting of a woman's face. You can fuck with the face, but it's still a painting of a face. And music, I like music. As far as rock and roll, I like music was made in the 60s and 70s. I like very little after that. And I like very little that was subjected to that idea that everything's got to sort of now be this sort of perfect sort of synthy, electronic, quantized, tuned, blah, blah, blah. I don't want that. I don't want someone producing me. I don't want someone coming in telling me how, oh, Kilbey, you've got to go and do that again. I don't need that. I don't want that. Maybe I did need it once. Maybe that was necessary, but I'm throwing all of that out the window, and a revolt into style as I see it. And it's really weird to see it dawn on players that you can do this. So I get really good players, and they go, oh, I made a mistake. And I go, I like that mistake. And I go, no, but it's a mistake. And I go, no, but I like it. I like mistakes. And we having, it's like, it's a sort of fluid music. It's not about, don't want everything to resolve and be neat and sweet. I want some frisson in it. So that's the Hall of Counterfeits is as far as I've gotten with this idea so far.
This record and the way you describe it has actually reminded me a fair bit of David Crosby's record, If I Can Only Remember My Name. It's that kind of loose, joyful vibe that can be found there. It's music of a feeling, not music of perfection. And, are you familiar with that record?
I have. When you said that, I suddenly went, God, I've got to get that out and listen to it again. I do know that record, and I agree with you. A lot of what Crosby, Stills and Nash did was that sort of rolling along. David, and that album, If Only I Could Remember My Name, it sort of rolls along and changes, and that is very much a desirable thing, yes. And another one was Hawkwind. Another always an inspiring band to me that sort of just let it all happen. And the sort of music imitated travel, and you felt like you were traveling, and you felt like things starting up and coming down. That's
yes, and music that leans away from resolution. Like the ending of that great Coen Brothers film, No Country for Old Men. If you've seen it, an ending like that, it lights up the imagination. I think there's a lot of joy in Ambiguity. And I hear that throughout your back catalogue, Steve, and I continue to hear that in the Hall of Counterfeits record as well.
Okay, well, thank you.
It's soft. It's something that leans into, it allows the listener to lean into their imagination more rather than having everything mapped out.
Totally. It's strange that I didn't see this right from the word go. I kind of did, and I was always trying to do this. And in the studio, I always had people going, "Oh, you can't do it like that. You've got to, you can't do that. It's got to, it's got to resolve, and it's got to be right." And I guess it's a sort of thing that's happened to me. Every musical thing I've ever tried to do, I always, as soon as I walk in the room on the first day, someone will be there going, "Oh, you can't do that. Oh, you shouldn't. No, oh, what are you doing? You can't do that." And it's like, I refuse to accept any more people ever telling me what I can do, unless they're paying me a shitload of money to go, "I want this." And then I'll go, "Yes, master, tell me what to do," and I'll do it. Left to my own devices, I'm throwing all the fucking rules out the window.
You've got I think you've got an engineer from the US who works with you and records with you. Is that right? Your engineer, you've got like your own engineer that you work with?
I've got, well, I wouldn't say he's my own, but he's an engineer. I went up to this studio. It used to exist in Sydney. Now it exists in Gosford, just north of Sydney. And I went in there to work on an album with Gareth Koch, and I met this guy. And the more I worked with him, the more I liked the way he was thinking. And he's like a 50-year-old American guy from Seattle and or Portland, I forget which one it is. And he sort of, I just found him when I would go, hey, can we turn this all backwards and then put delay on it and then chop that up and fuck that and blah, blah, blah. And he'd go, yeah. So I really like working with him. I don't want to work with anyone else. And we now have a sort of a musical shorthand. And I'll sing something. And by the time I've walked in the control room, I go, hey, you know that vocal I've just sung? And he'll go, I already did it. I go, you read my mind? He'll go, yeah, look. And he'll play it to me. And he's already done the thing that I heard him doing. So it's very important. A lesson I've learned is when you're trying to create, for me anyway, when I meet resistance, it uses up my amount of energy to create. So I go in the studio with that much energy. I say to the church, let's do something like this. And as soon as someone went, oh, I don't want to do that. And like, I feel my energy go. Argh. So I want to surround myself with people who all want to do the same thing.
I've heard you talk about the value of honesty in that relationship with this engineer as well, and how he's not afraid to tell you if something doesn't sound right.
No, I'm singing. We've been working on the new Church album. I go in there and sing, and he go, what did you think of it? And I said, I don't care what I think of it. I'm asking you what you think of it. And he go, yeah, I think you can do better. And I go, great, that's all I want. And conversely, when he says, that's enough, you've done it, then I know that I have. And that's really important. And then, but see, as soon as an engineer starts doing that, he's gone. And that's why I now credit this guy with co-production, because most engineers in America back in the day, if you were doing a vocal track and you go, what do you think? The engineer would be like, I don't know what I think, Steve. I'm not here. I'll keep going or I'll stop now, because engineers were paid not to have opinions. In fact, if they did squeak up and go, hey, I don't, they would be yelled at. So I've sort of, this guy, I promote him because he's so useful to me, saving me all this time and energy. And when you're singing, you don't know what you've done. You can't, you're in a room singing with cans on. Sometimes you don't realize you've done something brilliant, or sometimes you don't know you've done something absolutely awful. And to have a guy who immediately knows what you want, can go, no, that isn't what you're looking for, really alleviates, because you only got so much energy and so much thought you can give something. So if you can smooth the path in every way, you can get so much more done.
I think honesty is from someone credible, someone you trust, who you've got a good creative relationship, it's worth its weight in gold. Because like you said, when they say, yep, that works, okay, this works.
It's hard. It's sometimes a hard quality to have in a band. And sometimes in a band, if you say to someone, hey, look, that thing you just did, I don't like, the subtext is, and everything you do is fucked, and you're a rotten person, and you're inferior to me, and I'm superior to you, because so there was always this subtext going on in all the bands I've been in. When you go, I don't like something, that people would be angry and sulky and all of this sort of thing, and that you've suddenly got to deal with. Sometimes you have to stand there and go, I really fucking hate what this guy's doing, but if I tell him that. And sometimes I wasn't, also that was the other thing, I hadn't learned diplomacy. So I just stop and go, that thing you're doing, I really fucking hate, where I should have been thinking of another way to say it. But I've also reached a level where I don't want to have to think of ways. Someone said to me, oh, you had a good partnership with so-and-so, as long as he felt that you respected what he was doing. And I said, well, that's where it went wrong. because I don't want to work with anyone where I have to figure out what my sort of psychological approach to them is. I just want to walk in and go, bang, we're going to make this song. All the people who like it, if you like anything I'm doing, say yes. If you don't, say no. I won't take umbrance, and nor should you if I don't like what you're doing and you proceed with that. When you have a band, like, you know, to say you didn't like something is, you might as well say I'm going to come around and murder your grandparents.
Yeah.
So
There's an interpersonal dynamic and ego that gets in the way, and I imagine, isn't life too short for that? Like, I think a classic example is all those folks who wish that the police stayed together. And the more I've learned about that, the more I think, God, like, but why? Wouldn't that just be misery to be in that situation? Why continue? And I thought the same of you with the guys from the church. I know people can kind of have a sense of regret that Marty's not in the band anymore. And from what I've read and heard from you, I think, well, surely life is too short to be in a situation where every time you go into the studio, you've got all this stuff that you have to wade through.
I think the answer is I have arrived at a point where I don't want to share my thing with anybody anymore. I want to be in control of every single fucking thing I do. I need to be in control. I don't want to figure out ways of telling people I don't like what they do. I don't want to incorporate their ideas. I've got enough of my own ideas. I think the best thing, and I listen to the Hall of Counterfeits every now and then, because you can't listen to your own stuff all the time. Otherwise, when I got the CD of the Hall of Counterfeits, I drove around listening to it too much. And in the end, I couldn't hear it at all. But, you know, one day I will smoke a joint, put it on and surprise myself. And when I hear it, I go, yes, you should be in charge. It's just the way it is. I'm not very good at many things. If you took me on a camping trip, or if you were in a car that broke down, or if you needed almost anything, I'm useless. But when it comes to music, I have amassed so much music. I have amassed so much experience. I have amassed so much sort of modus operandi of ways of how I want to do things. I don't need to share this with anybody anymore. I can't, and I won't. And for the rest of my life, I'm not sharing it. Unless it's a situation like with Martin Kennedy. Martin Kennedy comes along and says, Steve, here's your song. And he's already created the music. And that's a different thing. And then that's a whole different aesthetic. Martin Kennedy comes along and says, here's the song. I don't fuck with his side of it. I'll either go, yes, I want to sing on that song, or no, I don't. And then once he's given it to me, he doesn't fuck with my side of it. And I sing whatever I want over it. But when it's creating music right from the ground up, I want to collaborate with people, but I realize I have to have the last say. And if it has to be brutal, then it has to be brutal. And I say, stop. I don't want this. This is going nowhere. We can't play this. Or if I have to go, stop. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Whether you like it or not, we're going to keep pursuing this. It has to be like that. I can't use up my chi energy on fucking arguing the toss with people. And, you know, and that's just the way it has to be. I have to sort of, and when I hear the Hall of Counterfeits, I go, yes, it was justified. All of that sort of, all of those decisions I made, I feel they're justified.
I'm glad to hear that you can still kick back and listen to that record and get something out of it, because so many artists record something and they don't listen to their back catalogue at all. And I wanted to...
You can understand why as well. Some of them you can go, well, I can understand why you ain't listening to that.
Do you listen to your old records much?
I was driving along the other day, and this abhorrent... I'm listening to this. I like listening to music that I hate. I'm driving along and they played Please, 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 Please Tell Me Now by Duran Duran, followed by Don't You Forget About Me. And as I listen to these songs, I'm ticking off all the fucking things I hate about them. And when I get out the car at the other end, that's as gratifying to me as listening to a whole lot of things inspire me. Figuring out what you don't want. You listen to fucking Duran Duran, you go, God, all those things I don't want. What are they all? Actually make a note of them, bring it out into the consciousness. Just don't go, oh, but figure it out. When you hear these things you really hate, figure it out what it is and make sure that never creeps into your music.
Do you listen to your back catalogue very much?
No. I usually listen to my latest album too much, and then I get sick of it. Every now and then I will smoke a joint and try and approximate the feeling of finding something for the first time. Or the other thing I do is I drag in somebody and listen to it through their ears. So if I have a new friend, I'll go, sit down, I want to play you an album I make called Priest Equals Aura. Have you ever heard it? And they no, I haven't. And I put it on and I watch them and I hear what they're saying and I watch their face. And in that way, I can maybe try and appreciate it. But do I go back and listen to Heyday? And no, I don't.
When's the last time you can remember hearing Priest Equals Aura?
I don't know. Here's what happens to me. I bought a car with a little cheap car with a CD player in it. So I looked around for all my CDs and I found some of my CDs with the church. I found Heyday and Uninvited Like the Clouds. And I put them in the player and I'd go, oh, I'm going to listen to Heyday. And I get 1 mile down the road and go, you didn't listen to one thing. And I find it very hard. It's like, I can't listen to it. It's like when I used to study it in high school and you go, I'm going to study this science thing I want to pass. And then you realize you read 3 pages and nothing went in. And the same happens when I go back and listen to my old music. It won't go in. It sort of goes in and straight back out. And I can't. So I'm usually really obsessed with whatever I'm doing at the time. So I'm making the new church album now, and I've sort of stepped in and taken over, and I'm quite obsessed by it.
So speaking of stepping in and taking over, I've heard you talk about how you've reflected upon your years with the church in the, through the 80s and 90s, and how you kind of wish that you had made a more concerted effort to define your role within the band at that point, and it could have saved a lot of headaches. And I wonder now, are you finding this is a more joyful experience because that is more defined?
I fucked it up for myself by becoming a heroin addict. If you want to be in control of something, one thing that's not going to give you control is being addicted to a drug like heroin that you've got to that you're relying upon. So I sort of had to abdicate. I'm trying to get my power source here. I have to sit down. So that was my own fault. And in the void of me being in control, which I was, in the void of me being in control, other people sort of started taking over. And I can't blame them. Somebody had to. But hang on. I've just got to check this for a sec.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right.
But it sounds like that process.
Okay, we're on.
Sounds like that process that you've described led to a more complex dynamic than was ideal for a songwriter like yourself.
Well, there's sort of we started off and it was my baby and I controlled everything that happened. And then I became a junkie and other people started sort of taking over. And it's a strange thing. I was thinking about this. John Lennon was simultaneously relieved that Paul McCartney took over and he didn't have to do all the work. On Peppers, when McCartney took over and stayed back and did and Lennon could go home and do whatever he was doing. he was simultaneously relieved and simultaneously angry. And I think I sort of got in the same situation, that I was relieved I didn't have to do it because I had to run around being a junkie. And I was sort of, I get quite angry when I think about it and some of the results that all yielded. Sometimes it all came together and sometimes it didn't. In a parallel universe where I didn't become a heroin addict, I think a lot better records would have been made. But that was my fault. I can't blame anybody who stepped in and saw the vacuum and picked up the slack. That's just the way things are. If you have a partnership and one of your partners goes AWOL, you still got to carry on. But I can't really condone all of the things that happened while I was missing in action. But
how does the church dynamic feel now?
It feels like it's my band now. Look, it's back. Like today, it's my band. They got to do what I ask them to do. It's got to be me. The buck has to stop with me. The responsibility is mine. This new album, it had to be my vision, and I had to kick it over the line. And the other members, all the people in the band, have contributed immensely, but it wasn't going to get finished until I stepped in and finished it. And that's just normal and natural, that I have kind of come back into my senses after the last church album I was totally unhappy with. It was an album made by committee, everybody having a vote on what songs we do, everybody having a vote on, everything was a vote. And it was Peter Koppas's last album, and he and I were at sort of odds. And I listen to it now, and it's everything I don't want the church to be. And this new album, I think, really makes amends for the ordinariness of that album. It's not a bad record. It's just very ordinary. There's one or two good tracks, and then a lot of stuff. I can't even remember how they go. I can look at the titles and I go, oh, I wonder what that is. It's just sort of, if you get a load of people voting and all deciding and not being able to do anything until everybody's agreed to it.
Well, that's another mechanical process which destroys any chance of there being something conceptually pure, something organic, a naturally cohesive whole, I think.
It can be, or okay, we're going to talk about Genesis. How the fuck did they operate when they had created something? Apparently it wasn't, and I keep reading Tony Banks saying it wasn't Peter Gabriel wasn't in control of all this. People think he was somebody, I don't know. I guess it is possible for a collective to create collectively. And the church have done some collective creating, but I feel now that it will be much better for the rest of our lifespan, whatever that is. I have to have the last word.
Yes. I guess what I meant was if you've got an album track selection which is decided by a committee, like things can be created by the whole unit, but as soon as you've got a track selection by committee and that kind of thing, I feel like, well, then how can this be an organically self-defined record when you've got votes that decide what's going to go in there? And I certainly don't think that's how Genesis worked, but I imagine with what you're doing right now with the church, if you're in charge, you're making the creative decisions, it must feel more pure. It must feel more unadulterated.
Well, to me, it does. I imagine some of the others might go, no, it just feels like he's got himself too much in the mix. Pink Floyd's an interesting example of that. It seemed when Roger Waters got the upper hand too much, For me, I lost interest in the Floyd a bit when it seemed that when he was dominating them all, I didn't like it so much. There could be people could go. I read a guy the other day on a internet page saying that I was trying to cast me as Roger Waters to Marty's Dave Gilmour, and going, Kilbey's the same as Roger Waters. He's this sort of dominating but sort of non-musical kind of guy trying to, control this sort of lovely, expressive guitarist.
That's a weird comparison. Because you, by definition, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass here, but by definition, you are pure creativity. There's this expansiveness of imagery in all of your work. And that just seems like an odd comparison, because the work of Roger Waters, I think, is very narrow, particularly when you look at the Floyd records. The flavor of it is quite narrow.
I think he is. I think he is. And there's some validity in that comparison, maybe, if you don't understand exactly. I don't know. Yeah, anyway.
I think it's testament to that intuition that what we talked about earlier, that the imagery in your lyrics remains, I think, just as potent, if not more potent now than it has ever been, because that's just a natural way that your brain seems to work. You seem to be someone who also draws from life and draws from your reading. You seem to be a voracious reader. You obviously love history, and this comes out in your music. And in fact, this leads me to one last thing I wanted to ask you about with the Hall of Counterfeits record, which is a song that has some of my favorite imagery in the record, which is Karnak. I love the lyric in this song. I'm going to Karnak. I'm going to paint my zebra black. I howl down your empty streets wrapped up in these marble sheets. Now, I don't want to risk demystifying the whole process of writing lyrics, but these are some lovely images, and I wanted to ask you about the inspiration behind that song.
I think the ancient world was a very exciting place, a very rock and roll place. There were heroic guys, there were vengeful gods, there were beautiful women, there were evil witches, there were sumptuous feasts, there were orgies and massacres and all kinds of things. I find the ancient world an endless source of inspiration that I think has been sadly missing from rock and roll. Hardly anybody ever even, like, people rarely are dipping into that imagery. And I just, I'm just giving voice to these wild characters, I think, from the past. And, it's sort of like if you could give a guy from 5,000 years ago a chance to sing with a rock band, what would he say? What would he sing?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I'm really tired of lyrics like, we're gonna rock, little baby, all night long. I'm done with that. I'm done with that sort of thing. And I'm looking around for interesting subjects to sing about, interesting characters to imagine or evoke that can step up to a microphone and sing about unusual things. And now there's, as I say, there's the record companies off my back and the producers off my back and other band members going, what are you doing? What are you doing? I can sing about anything I like, and I go back to the things I like, and that is the ancient world and mythology and religion and sort of all that kind of thing. It's sort of almost, I would say it's almost my gimmick that it's almost sort of ancient rock, ancient history rock is almost my soul, my own playground where nobody else is sort of stepping in. I don't hear I don't hear anybody writing songs about the ancient world. And yet it's just such a fertile ground for not only music, but for lyrics and attitudes. I'm working, I finished my bit. I'm working on a graphic novel about Hannibal from Carthage. I have always been deeply rooted in ancient history. And so, yeah, I'm just surprised it taken me so long to come right out of the closet with it and make an album like Hall of Counterfeits, which is just sort of full of it. And now I've got these players who play all these weird, strange, ancient instruments. Like some of the instruments, they're not playing samples of these things. They're really playing these Turkish and Arabic and Indian and Celtic and Norse, these weird instruments. I've got these guys who can play these fucking things and who own them. And they turn up and they come in with this thing, and I go, "What can that do?" And it goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Great, go and put on that song right now, whether it makes any sense or not. So, yeah, I just feel like this is my thing, the ancient world, and I sort of know a lot about it. I can certainly, if someone said, "You're going to live another 20 years, make an album every year, and every album's going to be about the ancient world," I go, "Great. You're never going to run out of fucking material there." I feel like the only person who ever really occasionally touched on it was Mark Bolan in his Tyrannosaurus, and Genesis did as well. Of course, Genesis did The Fountain of Salmacis. They were sort of getting these ancient, mythical, and Celtic. They were sort of mixing it all up as well.
This is what I was thinking about when you were talking about, coming out of the closet with your love of ancient history and writing from that place. I was thinking, okay, maybe this is the Genesis connection here. Maybe this is how Steve got into the band. Is that what attracted you in the first place?
I can still remember. I used to turn up. I had a job in the public service in Canberra, and I would drive down to the newsagents and get the latest copy of New Musical Express and Melody Maker, and I would sort of discover bands. And one day I was sitting. I can still remember sitting in the car, reading this article about Genesis, and it made they sounded and looked really interesting. Foxtrot had just come out, and I went and bought it. And I was for a couple of listens, I was a little nonplussed. I'm like, and then suddenly I was on board, and I went back and got Nursery Crime and Trespass, and then I got England by the Pound. And
how blown away were you by Supper's Ready when you first heard it?
I still am. The other day I was painting and it came on shuffle, and I just marveled. I marveled at how, and the ending is like that incredible ending. There's an angel standing in the sun crying in a loud voice. It's the supper of the mighty one. And all those instruments, the sort of mellotrons and Steve Hackett's guitar, it's absolutely magnificent. And we've just had 17 minutes of a complete journey, starting off, walking across the living room. It starts off this couple watching TV together and then just takes off. And it's just like what I was talking about. It's like a dream. It's like a story, and it just meanders. The music meanders without any reason. It meanders, things stop and start. There's these wonderful little meditative sections where I didn't realize what was doing it until I saw them, these recent films of them, where they're suddenly Banksy, Hackett, and Mike Rutherford are all on 12-string guitars, acoustic guitars, and they've got them all capoed in different places. And they're all just noodling against each other, but it sounds like a harp. It's so brilliant. Who would have thought 12-string acoustic guitars all just noodling away together? And then suddenly that's all gone, and sort of magnificent sort of the way he used the mellotron, and an incredible keyboard player that could do these arpeggios that are like diddly 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 diddly, like the carpet crawlers. This endless rippling across the music, like diddly 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 diddly. They're just as I said to you at the beginning of this, how did a bunch of guys who were 21, 22, how did they fucking start being, how were they able to play like that? How were they able to compose like that?
It's just a good question. They, I mean, from what I've read and heard in numerous interviews, is they started off with a bunch of bits. They talk about having bits, and then they kind of wonder, I wonder if they could go into that bit. And there was such an organic process to that piece. And I feel like the track Horizons, which precedes it, that's lovely Steve Hackett guitar piece. I've always felt that's actually part of Supper's Ready. I feel like that's the warm-up to that track.
Pretty much. At the same time, Yes would sometimes precede one of their epics with a little Steve Howe acoustic guitar meditation. He would sort of do a little meditation, and then that would finish, and then bang, this sort of spectacular huge thing would start. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy for Horizons to be part of Supper's Ready. It's like a sort of a prelude. Definitely
a prelude.
They come together. Yeah.
How do you feel about The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway?
I think it contains the very, very best pieces. The Carpet Crawlers and the Lamia, I just think are the best, are like Genesis taken to their height. The Lamia is just such a unbelievable, beautiful, powerful piece of music, and the lyrics, and the Carpet Crawlers as well, which managed to be a hit single in England.
Yeah. Can
you believe how the state of radio that in 1974 you get a song like that on the radio?
And with that lyric,
however, what's that?
With that lyric, I wonder what people who bought that single, what did they make of that lyric?
Yeah. There is lamb's wool under my naked feet. It's like, fucking hell. That's not, my baby and rocking on a Saturday night.
Exactly.
The whole double album in one go is a hard listen.
Yeah.
It's a bit probably like Hall of Counterfeits. It's definitely, you don't have to listen to the whole thing in one go. Most double, even the White Album is a hard listen from woe to go, the whole thing all the way through. It's a long time.
There are a few. The only double album I can listen to from beginning to end would be The Wall and the two of them, The Wall and Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds.
Okay.
I think The Wall is the last point at which I think Roger Waters' contribution makes sense in that record. Took me a while to get into it, but it makes such sense from beginning to end. Everything fits together as the way it should. But with The Lamb, sometimes you do need to have a bit of a break. It's very dense. It's such a dense, particularly lyrically and vocally dense record.
Yeah. Did you like the libretto that came with it? The sort of the explanation?
Oh yeah, I read that so many times when I was a kid, and that just built my fascination with the band and with Gabriel. And for a long time, I kind of felt disappointed that didn't continue later. And it's one of that part of Genesis, that way that Gabriel would express his creativity within the band. It's one of the reasons why it took me a little while to really consider the Collins era as being equivalent, and I do consider it to be equivalent now. It is like comparing apples and oranges, but I think they're both just as relevant. But for a long time, I kind of felt like, okay, well, it's just not as deep. It doesn't have as many layers. But
I never could follow after he'd gone, and I rapidly tired of his solo career too. But I don't think I didn't. I have to admit, like a real bigot, I haven't really listened to Wonder and Wuthering and all of those records. I felt without Peter Gabriel, it wasn't the same. And I liked his first solo album. I thought they just, as each one came out, until finally you got Sledgehammer and all that, and I was completely disinterested.
Sledgehammer, of course, is Gabriel, but that's actually the point at which I lost interest in Gabriel, was the So record. But Gabriel's first 4 records, I think, are amazing.
There are definitely some great numbers on them. Look, even if, just if someone to write the Lamia, even if a guy had popped up, done the Lamia and then disappeared, I would have gone, that guy should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just for that song alone. I don't find any of the Genesis albums absolutely perfect. I find tracks, Nursery Crime's got a hell of a lot of good tracks, but I don't like Return of the Giant Hogweed. I really like the floaty pastoral feeling of Trespass too. It's not a bad album. I think Selling in England by the Pound, there's some great moments as well. All of them, but not. I don't find from beginning to end all of it absolutely perfect. But I'm always coming at everything from now this point of view of what can I steal or be inspired by, and I'm sort of always just looking for the pure gold, and I don't have a lot of time for listening to things that only half get there, So
there is.
Sorry.
There's something truly majestic about an album, particularly a concept record that can really work from beginning to end. They're a very rare thing.
Even Tommy. I must admit, if I try and listen to the whole thing, by the end of side 3 and into side 4, I'm kind of getting impatient. It's very hard to pull off 80 minutes of non-stop listening. And I'm completely willing to concede that the Hall of Counterfeits is probably the same deal. If someone came to me and said, I listen to the whole album from beginning to end all the time, I'd go, Jesus, what's wrong with you? I don't know how it's like, there's not many that do go all the way through. I thought of one before. Now I've forgotten it again.
I've not listened to the Hall of Counterfeits from beginning to end either, purely because I've just never been in one place at the same time to do it. But I have listened to the whole thing a few times. And, look, for me, there's a couple of jaunty numbers on the record, which, sorry, but I skipped the jaunty ones. There's a couple of kind of upbeat numbers on there. I'm like, I don't want upbeat. I want to hear the doom. Okay.
I'm kind of with you. I'm very much with you on that. Jaunty, merry, jolly, I tend to avoid. I do like, I like Melancholia.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Which is different.
Definitely that's yeah.
Melancholia, it's different to sad. I never listen to sad music because it actually makes me feel sad, but melancholy, doom
makes
music.
You happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of doom, have you ever got into doom metal?
No. I hate metal. I hate doom. I hate all of that. I can't stand it. I hate whatever all that is. It just I'm not interested at all.
I'm not so much talking about the full-on frenetic double, triple kick pedal death metal. I'm talking about really slow doom, which is about 30 BPM, where it's almost like drone music.
Who's an example of that?
Ahab would be a great example.
Who?
Band called Ahab, and their music is full of nautical imagery, and there's a bit of kind of growl vocal, but there's some really beautifully sung vocal in there as well.
Okay, well, I really love Sigur Rós. That sort of, they seem to make this sort of devotional music. Is sort of like the whole idea of it is to sort of to be uplifting and reach, like hymns.
Yeah.
Like, I tell you, jaunty and jolly and happy, and I'm not into it all. If someone comes up to me and goes, "Oh, I've got a jaunty piece of music for you," I'm like, count me out. I try not to do jaunty. There is a little bit of jauntiness, I guess, on that album, but it sort of doesn't last very long.
And you could argue also that you've got to have, you know, a couple of moments in there, a couple of Harpo Marx moments through such an expanse of more dark kind of melancholic.
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe 80 minutes of pure something is too much for people, and by necessity you have to put in other things just so they can. I mean, it's like, you know, someone who works in a chocolate factory, you can't just eat chocolate all day. You can't just listen to gloom music all the time. Otherwise, you need a little bit of something else so you can get back into it, I guess.
Well, without light, there's no darkness, and without darkness, there's no light.
Yeah. There you go.
I also wanted to ask you about films, because I imagine that a lot of your work sounds cinematic, and your lyrical imagery is very cinematic in nature. And especially the church music is a very cinematic band. It's something which I think defines the church. It's almost like someone sat down and said, okay, if this piece of music could also score a film, then it's a church song. That's kind of what it feels like for me. And I wondered what films through your life have really had a big impact on you and might have even influenced you musically.
Well, I always say this, but when I was really young, I was incredibly, like we all were, I was really impressionable. And there wasn't a real lot on at the cinema in those days. There probably was only one cinema in the place where I grew up. And so my mum and dad saw films that they probably didn't really want to see. And a couple of them were these biblical epics. And the music and the things that would happen in these films, you know, boom, 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 you know, all of that really had a big impact on me. Certainly, it's a bit of a cliche to say this one now, but I innocently watched it when I was 13 my dad bought me a black and white TV, and I had it in my bedroom, and one night I was watching ABC late, and I saw this movie, The Seventh Seal, which is up now. Now, when you say that, it's like, oh God, you know, it's
no,
like,
not at all. I love Bergman.
Huh?
I love Bergman.
Yeah, everybody loves it. And Woody Allen and so many people have said The Seventh Seal is a really definitive film. But I had never heard of it, or I never heard of any of this. I was 13, I put it on, it came on, and I was completely taken by it.
Wow.
And that movie had a big impact on me. Certainly 1984. When they made that into a film, I thought that was pretty brilliant. And then Brazil, which was that strange comment on that. Army, the 12 Monkeys, or the Army of the 12 Monkeys.
Oh, I love 12 Monkeys. Yeah, well, both Brazil and 12 Monkeys are Terry Gilliam.
Yeah.
Yes, and I do love post-apocalyptic films. But speaking of Bergman, have you seen other Bergman films?
I've seen them all, I think.
I think my favourite is Through a Glass Darkly. That's the one I've seen the most.
Through a Glass Darkly, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen The Magician?
Yes. Beautiful.
And have you seen a very rare one called The Hour of the Wolf? Yeah,
I watched that recently, and to be honest, I struggled with it. I found it a bit dry.
Okay.
Yeah, but tell me what you thought of it.
I love this thing. You know, if someone said to me, I've just seen this film about these people who go in this room and then some of them turn into animals, I'm like, I'm on board. I want that. I don't want to see films about a lawyer has a kidnapped son and he must track he must find the hostages and, stop a world disaster, or a coming of age story of a young girl. I'm lost. I don't want to. I want something amazing. I want gods. I want magic. I want witches. I want heaven and hell. I want other dimensions. I want time travel, space travel, dreams. I don't want I don't want Die Hard. Two zany cops track down a naughty criminal and bring him to justice. If that's what the film is, count me out. I don't want any of that old bank robbing or people. When you see the new James Bond film, it's like car chases and guys on motorbikes jumping over bridges and people shooting each other and all that. I'm like, that is so fucking boring.
Well, that's genre devolving into formula, and again, it's more mechanized filmmaking.
And now it's all CG. What's it called? CG.
Yeah, computer generated.
Yeah. So it's a film I really like recently. Oh, not that recently. Was 300.
I know of it, but I haven't seen it.
Oh, you should really see that. The one about Sparta holding up the Persians.
Right.
The king of the Persians is a thing to behold.
I wondered when I saw trailers for that. I thought, this looks like a CG fest? Like
it is. It's totally CG, and the film wouldn't have got made without that. Get used to the CG. It's sort of everything's a CG fest these days, mate. There's no.
It doesn't have to be though.
Huh?
I don't think it has to be. That's why I love filmmakers like Christopher Nolan, who does everything in camera.
Who does that?
Christopher Nolan.
But is he making, like, if you make a film about Alexander the Great, it's gonna need CG. Like, you know what I mean? The days are over when you can have 10,000 real extras marching along.
There's truth to that. I think the best use of CG is when it achieves that end, like you're describing, but you don't notice it. And I think quite often it's misused and it's done in a kind of lazy I think it's like Marvel cinema, which has set the new model for how CG gets used.
Yeah.
But you can look at a series like the David Fincher series, Manhunter, where so many of the backdrops were done by CG and you would have no idea that he'd done it.
Yeah. When I watch old films now and there's Humphrey Bogart and the leading lady driving along in a car.
Yeah.
It's raining and New York's going past, and you realize, you'll see how obviously fake all that is. I don't even know if people, the average person seeing all this stuff, is even aware of it. But in the case of 300, it's blatant CG. It's like, it's so blatant. They're not even trying to hide it. And I quickly got over that and enjoyed it for what it was worth, and thought to myself, without that CG, they never would have been able to make this film. So I'm grateful for it.
Well, no matter the effects, no matter the adornments, at the end of the day, you have to have good writing, good casting, good performances, and really you can forgive any of the effects and production if you've got those things. And relationships, a good, engaging relationship somewhere in that story. There's got to be a human relationship in there.
Apparently, I've had a few. I've tried to write a few things and had a few Zoom meetings with execs, and they're always telling me about all the arcs and the this and that. Apparently you do have to have all those things. I guess that's why I like music, because you don't have to have any of that. It's like, if in a song, anything can happen for any reason, and the song can suddenly stop, and songs can suddenly change tense and change person, and everything can change and stop and start and go away and go awry. You don't have to explain it. I guess that's why I'm a songwriter and not trying to be a director or an actor. I think, and I also believe that old saying, God knows who said it, but music is capable of making statements that nothing else no, a film cannot give me the pleasure that good music gives me. You might see the film once and watch it and go, wow, but can you watch it every Sunday morning? No. But can you listen to your favorite record? I've got records now I've been listening to for over 50 years, and they still give me as much pleasure as they ever did. I don't think a book or a painting or a film or anything else can do that. I think music is the most open and interpretable and ambiguous art form there is. And I like the fact that all those things you have to do in a film, and all the people are going to watch it and go, what about in music? No one's going to, you know, if you make an album, someone's going to go, why did you suddenly sing that in the middle? You know, there's no answer to it. It's just like, that's what I felt like singing. And people usually accept it. So songs seem like you can do anything you like. And that's what attracts me to them more than anything. And that's, I just running from constrictions. I just don't want any constrictions. I don't want to have to answer to anybody. I don't have to sit down and go, I finished my album, then sit in a room full of people listening to it, go, got to shorten that one. I don't want that anymore. I want it to just be a crazy, you know, like I'm a crazy, eccentric old guy. And after all these years, I found out a way of having my own. I've got some patrons who will pay for me to be crazy and eccentric. I go into a great studio. I take crazy and eccentric musicians in there, and we just see what sort of chaos and mayhem we can create.
That relationship you have with your patron in the US, you know, it's kind of like that relationship between Renaissance artists and their sponsors.
Exactly.
And it's like
exactly.
The music business is so, like you've just been describing, with what happens with executives and, oh, you should remove this and you should shorten this and where's the chorus and that kind of stuff. The music business is also really ruthless and exploitative. And so perhaps, you know, having a sponsor is the way forward if only more wealthy people had this kind of good taste.
I totally agree with you. And I like to think, if I was a rich man and I saw an artist or a director or a musician struggling that I admired, I like to think I would contact him and say, hey, here's 50 grand. Go and make another film like that. Here's 50 grand. Go and make another album like that. And I've had 3 wonderful patrons. They're all in America. They're also professional guys. None of them are gazillionaires, but they sort of believe in what I do. And every now and then I talk one of them into chucking me some more money so I can do some more stuff. And they don't question it at the end. They don't go, what do you call this? There's no choruses. You know, they're happy for whatever it is. And
so they're effectively silent partners in a way.
They are exactly. And obviously these 3 guys, they've got enough, you know, they've got their couple of houses and they've got their cars and whatever it is, and they got some spare money, and they're sort of doing the right thing. And I think this will, I would imagine even, I'm sure 5,000 years ago, not all the kings were rotten and nasty, and there would have been kings who have gone, hey, bring that lyre player in here. And the guy comes in, and the king goes, hey, here's some money, get a new lyre, travel to Egypt and do some lessons. And, you know, I'm commissioning you to write this epic song for me. I'm sure there's always, this relationship has always existed. There has always been people with money who when they've satisfied all their needs and they don't want to buy any more condos and yachts and Jaguars, they go, I'm going to get this, you know, it might be a guy doing pottery. I'm going to pay this guy because he won't be able to do it otherwise, and feel like they're getting a really good deal for their. I know my patrons have been very happy with what we do, and they like to be in on the process. They like to hear how it's going, and you can ring them up and go, oh, you know, I'm not. And they're sounding boards. I think it's a very healthy thing. It's very reaffirming that not everybody in the world is in it for a quid.
It places a value on creativity as well. Like that's such a great, blessed experience that you've got with this, because now in the post-streaming, post-Spotify world, the value of creativity has been totally fucking decimated. And the way that the way you describe this relationship with your patrons, that is more how creativity should be valued and rewarded, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think creativity is everything. It's a sort of a quality. It's like the Hindus look at life like this, that we are all like little gods, and like a spark from a fire, this big fire being God, and humans being these individual tiny little sparks, not in quantity but in quality. We all have a desire to create, and you know, Vishnu creates universes, and men create poems and epics and paintings and music. That's how we and creativity is the most wonderful thing. I feel I don't have much money. I'm just in a rented flat, and I don't have a lot of things. I've got a pretty bomby old car. I've got a couple of nice guitars. I don't own much stuff. But if someone said to me, look, I'm going to give you a huge house in Mossman and a Jaguar and a yacht and blah, 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 but you've got to give up your creativity, I go, no way. This creativity that I've always had, I've been lucky with that. And it never lets me down. And I love creating stuff. I can't stop. I can't stop. I just want to, I'm planning more and more and more music. I'm always thinking about what the next thing will be, and really excited to keep pushing this thing and to have this. It's a wonderful honor and responsibility to spend your life creating things for people to enjoy, just pulling all of this stuff out of one's head. And as I say, at the end of the day, I still think music is the most. My father told me that music's the most important thing in this world. Do you understand? I went, yes, I do. And I don't have a son to tell that to, but I tell it to my daughters. Music it's the best thing we've got. I really believe that.
This brings me to what I'd like to be the last question. We've been talking for a while, and
okay.
This will lead me into what I think could be a good last question for this particular session.
Okay.
I'm observing that in everything that you're saying there, and it's evident in your music as well, Steve, that you're still hungry. You're still creatively hungry. And I'm aware that the vast majority of artists out there seem to go to seed after a couple of decades of making music. And I think that's because they're often not hungry anymore by that point. You, on the other hand, you haven't had the luxury of being able to kick back and enjoy the fruits of your labors. And I wondered, are you a better artist now because of your years of addiction, because you never did the whole big house and 3 cars and all of that stuff?
I think that sort of success would have been very bad for me. I think it all worked out wonderfully that me and the church were able to be in this position where we weren't nothing. People were still interested in us, but most people weren't. But we had something going. We always had, as we rose and fell, there was always some people interested. There wasn't loads of money, but there was enough money to get by. And there was enough money that we could play shows and do an American tour and come home with $5,000 in your pocket. And you go, wow, that's as good as it gets. So I think I'm very lucky that I've sort of been in this position. And I think winning the lottery with music and making $1 gazillion would have been bad for me, would have been bad for my creativity. And I think I'm sort of enjoying the idea that I'm such a broke, scruffy old bohemian that just goes on making this crazy music. That I enjoy the character that I am. And I think it amuses me to do this. And I have this incredible competition with myself. As soon as I finish Hall of Counterfeits and there it is and I've listened to it, it's like, bang, now I want to do the next one. I want to show myself and whoever's listening, I can do the next thing. And just all the ideas that keep occurring to me and all the wonderful musicians that are starting to flow through my life, and finding studios and engineers and getting this system in place. I'm really enjoying it, and I am hungry. And there's also a real cliche that I used to hate. I used to hate hearing this cliche, and now I'm going to say it. The more I know about music, the more I realize how little I know, and the more I realize there are so many parameters to twiddle and manipulate and fiddle around with, so many assumptions to challenge, so many doors to kick down, that I'm just hungry to get in there, get in that studio and do whatever I can and sort of put all my experience. And I'm not incredibly talented. I'm not an incredibly talented guy, but I'm a very intelligent guy, and my intelligence is happy to manipulate the little bit of talent that I have. I think that's better for me than if it was the other way around, where I'm like this brilliant musician but doesn't know what to do. I'm sort of far more of a guy, I know what to do, I know what to do. I don't know if I can do it, but I know what I want to do. So I'm really sitting here. I'm 67 years old. Sitting here, I'm really happy with who I am and where I am in the cosmic scheme of things. And I'm happy to make this music forever. People go, will you retire? And I go, why would I? What am I going to do? This is my fun. I really enjoy this. I still feel guilty that I go on stage and I make money out of doing what I love. I can't quite get over that idea. Sometimes I go, wow, you just walked on and played and you're going to get $1,000 from that. It's sort of like the 15-year-old in me goes, wow, that's incredible, man. I'll never get used to that. I just want to keep on playing and creating till I drop off my perch. I think what a tragedy to be a musician. People who get arthritis I've got tinnitus closing in on me now, but that threatens to stop my career. But what a tragedy if you get some physical malady or something happens to your voice, you can't sing, or I think that's a real tragedy. I think I'm really lucky that at this age I can still play and I still can sing, and that there are people interested in what I do. So and
like you were saying before, you've still got something to prove to yourself as well. With every record you work on, you want to prove something to yourself. You are your own taskmaster.
Look, I tell you what, as good as, say, Priest equals Aura is, it doesn't hold my hand on a cold night where I'm feeling washed up and I don't feel like I've got any ideas. I can't cheer myself up going, well, you made Priest equals Aura 30 years ago. You did Heyday. You wrote Under the Milky Way. That does nothing for me. It's an ongoing thing. And as you do each thing, that's finished, and then you're on to the next thing. I'd like to go on making 5 albums a year, every year. You don't have to, no one's forced to fucking buy them or even review them or even listen to them. But that's what I'd like to do. I like to just keep on, while I'm in such a fertile place, and now have seized control of my life and my music again. After a long process, I'm ready just to keep on rocking until they pull the curtain down.
That's something I find inspiring about you, Steve, and I've heard you talk about this it's music for music's sake. I've heard you talk about how you don't really care if only 30 people listen to the record and get into it. If you can reach one person, it was worth making. And you're also challenging yourself, which that is really inspiring. And I would like more independent musicians to get that message as well, because it can be so soul destroying going through the process of self-promotion and not being able to find an audience, and you can lose that joy of creating in that process.
I agree. I'm very lucky, and people point this out to me, that my fame came from being part of the Big Machine, which has now been dismantled. The Big Machine got me out there and launched me. So there always is, on this earth at any one time, there are 3,000 or 4,000 people who are interested in what I do. And that's enough. That's all it has to be. If 3,000 or 4,000 people buy my records and come to my shows and all that, that's all I need. So I'm in a really lucky position. And I really, when I occasionally meet young musicians, say, what should I do? I go, mate, I don't know what you can do. I don't know how it works these days. Everybody can make music. Everybody can have access to it, but there's no filtering it all out. In my day, the filter was the record companies. There were only, if you go back, in a time machine to say 1984, on any given week, there were only, say, 30 rock records that came out that week. But these days, there's probably, today alone, probably 1 million tracks went up on a SoundCloud somewhere. How would you fucking know?
Yeah.
How would I ever hear of that band you were talking about, the nautical band? How would I have ever apprehended them? I don't know. How do they find? I don't know. I've got my thing going for me, but I couldn't give any advice to anybody else on how to do it. And I really do feel for all the people who've really got something to offer that no one will ever hear of. But that always was. And even in my era, and, probably at the same time Botticelli had his patron giving him a bazillion liras, there was a guy across the road who was probably as good a painter of him that we'll never hear of. And that's the luck of the draw. And that's how it will always be. And in each era, you have to figure out how to penetrate the system so you can get your stuff heard or seen or whatever it is.
I've pretty much given up trying to work out how to penetrate the system. But I love making music, and as soon as I get even remotely invested in how is this going to get an audience, that energy that you talked about for me, just completely gone. It's like
I completely agree with you. I think there's absolutely no point in making. I meet people and they're great guitarists, and they say, "Oh, I just play for myself. I just make little cassettes for myself. I just write poems. I just paint pictures I just made this little film for myself." And it's like, I'm completely dissatisfied with that. And I'm always going, wait till the audience hear this. I totally agree with you. What's the point of being a musician if no one's ever going to hear it? And to think that you're making something brilliant that no one will ever hear is probably the saddest and most dispiriting thought that there is. It's the saddest position to be in for a musician. So I hear what you're saying. That would stop me dead in my tracks. When I was a young man and before I'd been discovered, I was happy to keep making all this music that no one ever heard, because I kept living on the dream, one day someone will hear this. But if I was plopped in the middle of it, and I knew there never was going to be, that dream was never going to be realized, I think I'd be dispirited. I think I'd find something else to do, because it would break my heart. Because I think for me, music and art and poetry, every single thing I do, I don't want to even open a notebook and write down 3 words if someone somewhere isn't going to read those 3 words. Everything I do is designed for other people. So I hear what you're saying, and it makes me sad.
Yeah, in order to exist, it needs to have a respondent. needs to have an audience. And
you do. Even God created this world, and he goes, yeah, that's cool having all those animals and all those trees and birds and clouds, but who's going to tell me? Who's going to review it? Who's going to look at all this stuff and go, wow? So he had to have humans, or she had to have humans. You need any artist, even the greatest artists of all, needs an audience, needs someone to give him some feedback and go, wow, this river with its fish and all the stuff that's going on blows my mind. You've got to have that. Otherwise, who are you doing it for? What
I was reminded of when you talked about this in another interview recently was that it doesn't necessarily matter how big that audience is. If there are 5 people that love this thing that you've done, that can be worth it. That you've actually reached those people, you've made a difference to that small number of people.
I agree with that as far as records go. I don't agree with that if it's playing a gig where there's no one there.
Yeah.
I find that's a whole different thing. If 5 people buy my record and love it, that's one thing. If I do a gig in a 200-seat theatre and there's only 5 people there, that will break my heart. So I have to change that a little bit and go, that's good for recorded works, but not for actual live gigs. You need enough people in the audience so the audience can lose themselves and they're not sitting there going, oh, there's no one here, and feeling embarrassed for you. I still sometimes play gigs where there's no one there, and that's a heartbreaker for sure.
Oh, that's doing a rehearsal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, Ben.
Really, really nice talking with you, Steve.
Nice talking to you, mate. And let's get on to Glide when you can.
We're going to do it. I'll be there at the Thornbury. I'll be there with my gear. I'll do some filming. I'll capture you guys in action. Yeah, and hopefully we can do an interview, like a filmed interview at that time, if time permits.
Totally, Ben. Totally. You've got my address. Give me a call. You got my number.
Yeah.
Whatever you like. Okay, mate.
Okay. Have a good one, Steve. Bye.
Bye, mate.
The Hall of Counterfeits album is available for purchase on Bandcamp. Steve Kilbey will be playing the Church Singles 1980 to 1992 on January 13 and 14, 2022 at the Thornbury Theatre in Melbourne.